Statistically speaking, the Wild West wasn't just cowboys with itchy trigger fingers or outlaws hiding in the hills. Sure, there were quick draw duels and rattlesnakes waiting to ruin your day, but much of the West was actually built and held together by people you rarely see in the movies. Women, more specifically, women who ran saloons and brothels, the madams. These women weren't just background figures in lace dresses. They were entrepreneurs, power brokers, and sometimes ruthless bosses who shaped the frontier in ways few people realize. Picture this. You're stepping into a dusty mining town in the 1870s. Men stumble out of the saloon, pockets stuffed with gold dust, ready to spend it on cards, whiskey, and company. Behind the swinging doors, though, it isn't the bartender or the sheriff who runs the show. It's a madam. She's wearing silk gloves, dripping in jewelry, and she knows exactly how to turn miners' wages into her fortune. Being a madam wasn't just about business, it was survival in a society that gave women almost no legitimate options. Some started as soiled doves, working girls with few choices, and clawed their way up into management. Others built empires that rivaled the richest men in town. And while they wore fine gowns and hosted lavish parties, they also dealt with bribery, blackmail, rivalries, and sometimes heartbreak. So tonight we're going to take a look at what it was really like to be a madam in the Wild West. Before we dive in, be sure to subscribe to the Sleepy Historian tonight and drop a comment letting us know which parts of frontier life you'd like us to explore next. Saddle up, partner. It's time to step inside the saloon where women ran the show. Part 1, The Road to Becoming a Madam. When people imagine the Wild West, they often picture gunslinging cowboys, dusty saloons, and poker games that ended with someone flipping the table. What's less talked about is how many parts of the frontier were run, sometimes quietly, sometimes very publicly, by women. More specifically, women who called themselves madams. For most women in the 1800s, respectable work was limited. There were no banks handing out business loans to ladies, no corporate ladders to climb, and certainly no LinkedIn to help them network. Independence, let alone wealth, was almost impossible without marriage. But there was one route open. Two women who had ambition, thick skin, and the courage to break taboos, running a brothel. Many madams started their careers as so-called soiled doves, a cruel term society used for prostitutes. They were already veterans of the trade, women who knew firsthand the realities of late-night saloons and the desires of traveling men. From this foundation, they climbed upward, turning from laborers into entrepreneurs. Some names stand out in the history books. Mattie Silks, who would become one of the most famous madams in Colorado, began her career as a working girl and quickly recognized she could earn far more by managing others. By the time she was 19, she was already running her own establishment, a teenager in control of her own empire. Jenny Rogers, known as the Queen of the Row in Denver, had the same instincts. She built her wealth not only through the sex trade, but also by investing in irrigation projects that boosted the city's infrastructure. In Montana, Dolores Jara became so successful that she lent money to other women, flipping the traditional power structure on its head. These women didn't just create places for men to drink and gamble, they built full-blown enterprises. They obtained liquor licenses, managed payrolls, and operated boarding houses. They reinvested profits into shops, real estate, and local businesses. In a time when society offered women little more than a kitchen or a cradle, these so-called fallen women became self-made business tycoons. Still, their beginnings were rooted in a profession despised by polite society. They had to fight against judgment, endure insults, and work harder than anyone else to stay in business. Yet through determination and resourcefulness, they carved out power in a world designed to keep women powerless. The Wild West may have belonged to the cowboys on paper, but in truth, it was often the madams who pulled the financial strings. Part 2. Fashion, power, and social respectability. Once established, a madam's next challenge was creating the right image. Reputation in the Wild West could be fickle, and appearances mattered. If you wanted to run the finest parlor in town, you couldn't look like a common woman off the dusty trail. You had to look like royalty. Madams wore elaborate dresses imported from Europe, complete with silk gloves, feathered hats, and jewelry that sparkled under lamplight. They rode in carriages, not on horseback. They dined on fine foods and drank champagne when most of the town survived on whiskey and beans. This wasn't just vanity, it was strategy. By presenting themselves as refined ladies, they elevated their businesses, attracting men who wanted the illusion of high society alongside. Their indulgences. Pearl DeVere of Cripple Creek, Colorado, was a perfect example. Once a dressmaker, she used her skills to craft elaborate wardrobes for herself and her staff. She was often seen parading through town in an ornate carriage, turning every head along the road. Another madam, Sadie Orchard, carefully imitated the styles of proper English women to give her boarding house an air of legitimacy. Even Jessie Reeves, known for her no-nonsense approach, lent her girls money so they could buy elegant clothes, ensuring her establishment looked as refined as any high-class parlor. Madams understood that they weren't just selling company. They were selling an experience. Their houses were decorated with lavish curtains, chandeliers, and upholstered furniture that stood in sharp contrast to the rough-hewn cabins most settlers lived in. To step into a madam's house was to escape the grit of the frontier and enter a world of decadence. Society might have frowned upon the profession, but communities often tolerated or even quietly supported these women. The money they brought and kept towns alive. Some Native American tribes acknowledged the trade's economic value. Even politicians who denounced vice in public were often regular visitors in private. Still, there was a delicate balance. To maintain business, madams had to appear respectable, even while running establishments considered scandalous. It was a paradox. They were simultaneously ostracized and admired, but in the end, their ability to project elegance gave them an edge. The men came for company, but they stayed and paid because madams created an atmosphere that promised luxury in a land that usually offered none. Part 3. Wealthy clients and political influence. The real key to a madam's success wasn't just attracting miners or drifters. It was winning over the wealthy. High-paying customers included businessmen, army officers, and politicians. These men had the money to pay handsomely, and just as importantly, they had influence. A madam who counted powerful men among her clientele could negotiate more than just fees. She could negotiate favors. Belle Brezing of Lexington, Kentucky, became famous for this strategy. She catered exclusively to high-class men, ensuring her establishment had a reputation far above the ordinary brothel. She became so renowned that Margaret Mitchell reportedly used her as the model for the character Belle Watling in Gone with the Wind. This approach wasn't unusual. Madams often reserved their own services for elite clients, creating an air of exclusivity that only made them more desirable. Sometimes transactions weren't just financial. Favors were exchanged, alliances formed. A madam who had leverage over a senator or a sheriff could ensure her business stayed safe from raids or regulation. At the same time, many madams worked hard to appear as community benefactors. They donated to libraries, bought school supplies for poor children, or provided blankets to firefighters. Jessie Reeves was known for her generosity toward the homeless. These charitable acts weren't only altruistic, they also bought goodwill. A town might disapprove of a brothel, but it was harder to condemn a woman who fed or clothed the needy. Taxes were another tool. Madams scrupulously paid their dues, knowing that keeping the town treasury happy was key to avoiding harassment. They may not have been welcomed into polite social circles, but their money certainly was. Through this mix of generosity, influence, and strategic charm, madams built networks of protection and respect. They became more than business owners, they were power brokers. Part 4: Competition, Schemes, and the Dark Side of Business Life. As a madam was far from glamorous. Beneath the polished jewelry and fine dresses was a ruthless world of competition. Rivalries between madams could be just as fierce as shootouts between outlaws. Cad Thompson of Virginia City, Nevada, was known for her temper. She once beat one of her own employees, Mary Livingston, so badly that the fight landed them in court. She was acquitted, but her reputation as a tough, volatile madam stuck. Other battles were less physical and more theatrical. Madams staged parades through town, showing off their best-dressed girls like prize horses at auction. Tessie Wall became infamous for this tactic, strutting her staff through the streets in expensive European gowns. Jessie Hayman, her rival, tried to outdo her. The resultant one-upmanship only drew more attention and customers. Then there were the dirtier tricks. Jenny Rogers once threatened to expose a local politician as a client, walking away with $17,000 in hush money, a fortune at the time. Bribery was common too, with madams slipping money to hotel clerks or bellboys who steered new arrivals to their establishments. Profit didn't only come from companionship. Alcohol sales were a major source of income. Madams charged up to 60%, more than saloons, and often watered down the whiskey to stretch supplies. Gambling brought in even more cash, while theft was sometimes tolerated or even encouraged. A man who passed out drunk in a brothel might wake up missing his wallet. Behind the velvet curtains and gold-trimmed mirrors, these were ruthless businesses, and the women who ran them acted as both CEOs and enforcers. They were calculating, ambitious, and unafraid to bend or break the rules to protect their empires. Part 5: Family Lives and Personal Costs. Despite their profession, many madams had families. Some were wives and mothers, juggling their business with domestic life in a way society rarely acknowledged. Maddie Silks married multiple times and eventually adopted the daughter of one of her lovers. Madame Sophie of Boulder left behind a young son when she died in 1877. Perhaps most famously, Squirrel Tooth Alice, whose real name was Mary Elizabeth Haley Thompson, had 9 children. While she had a husband, William Texas Billy Thompson, at least 3 of her children were fathered by other men. Her nickname came from her distinctive buck teeth, which only added to her notoriety. Family life, however, was often secondary to business. Many madams ran their establishments with iron fists, keeping all the money their girls earned. A woman who charged $5 for her company often saw that entire sum go to room and board, leaving nothing for herself. If she couldn't meet the quota, she risked being thrown out into the street. Still, madams provided more stability than many alternatives. For some women, working under a madam meant food, clothing, and shelter in a world where single women had few options. Yet the cost was high. Their independence was traded for survival. Meanwhile, madams themselves carried the burden of maintaining appearances, managing employees, and constantly fending off threats from rivals, from the law, and from the darker sides of the business. Behind the diamonds and silks, their lives were filled with stress, secrecy, and sacrifices. Part 6: Decline, Addiction, and Tragic Endings. For all their wealth and power, many madams did not end their lives in comfort. The pressures of the trade, combined with the vices that surrounded them, often led to tragic downfalls. Alcoholism was common. Maddie Silks, for all her success, lived miserably with her partner, Court Thompson, a man who drained her finances and treated her poorly. Their relationship was fueled by heavy drinking and constant conflict. Drug use was another silent killer. Madame Sophie died of an overdose in 1877. Pearl de Vere, known for her extravagant parties, met the same fate in 1897 after consuming too much morphine. She went to bed one night after drinking heavily and never woke up. Even Jenny Rogers, the shrewd queen of the row, ended her life plagued by addiction and unhappiness. For all their cunning, these women could not always escape the dangers of the world they inhabited. Their deaths reveal a paradox. On one hand, madams were savvy entrepreneurs who built empires from nothing. They gave back to their communities, contributed to local economies, and wielded real influence in a male-dominated society. On the other hand, the lifestyle they were forced to adopt often consumed them, leaving them lonely, addicted, or betrayed by those closest to them. Today, their legacy is complicated. They were vilified as immoral, yet respected as powerful businesswomen. They lived lives of luxury and despair, independence and exploitation. Above all, they remind us that in the Wild West, power did not always belong to the fastest gun or the richest miner. Sometimes it belonged to a woman in a silk dress, sitting in a velvet chair, who knew how to play the game better than anyone else.